The snow was falling gently outside my kitchen window when I received the phone call that would change everything. It was 2 weeks before Christmas 2023, and I was decorating sugar cookies with the grandchildren's names piped in red icing when my daughter Jessica's voice came through the speaker, trembling slightly. "Mom, we need to talk." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I set down my piping bag and wiped my flour-dusted hands on my apron. After 47 years of being a mother, I knew that tone. It was the same voice she'd used as a teenager when she'd crashed the car or failed a test. Something was wrong. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the knot forming in my stomach. "It's about Christmas dinner," she began, and I could hear her husband Marcus in the background, his voice a low rumble of instructions. Marcus thinks it might be better if we kept Christmas small this year, just immediate family." I felt my heart skip. For 25 years, ever since Jessica had gotten married, I'd hosted Christmas dinner at my house. The whole family would gather, my 3 children, their spouses, 7 grandchildren ranging from 3 to 17. It was our tradition, our foundation, the highlight of my year. "What do you mean immediate family?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. Jessica's voice grew smaller. "Marcus said that technically, you're not immediate family to us anymore. You're extended family." The words hit me like a physical blow. Extended family. Extended family. After raising 3 children as a single mother, after working 2 jobs to put them through college, after babysitting their children countless times, after being there for every crisis, every celebration, every milestone, I was now extended family. But before I could process this fully, she continued, "And Mom, there's something else. Marcus has been thinking about the holidays, and he believes it's time for us to start hosting. He wants to take over the tradition." I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, staring at the sugar cookies that now seemed to mock me with their cheerful faces. "Take over the tradition?" "Yes, and he thinks it should be at our house from now on. He's already planning the menu." What Jessica didn't say, but what I heard loud and clear in her hesitation, was that I wouldn't be invited to that dinner either. After 25 years of cooking, cleaning, shopping, and preparing everything to make their Christmas magical, my son-in-law was not just taking over, he was shutting me out entirely. Now, let me tell you how I, Eleanor Walsh, 68 years old and apparently extended family, decided to remind them exactly who holds the real power in this situation. You see, what Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned something far more valuable than just a house that could host Christmas dinner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the moment everything started to unravel. It was a crisp December morning when I first met Marcus Rodriguez 5 years ago. Jessica had been dating him for 8 months and was absolutely smitten. She brought him to Sunday dinner, and I'll admit, I was prepared to like him. He was handsome in a polished way, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch that caught the light when he gestured. He worked in commercial real estate, drove a Mercedes, and seemed to adore Jessica. What struck me first wasn't his appearance or his car, though. It was the way he looked around my home during that initial visit. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging, assessing. He asked pointed questions about the neighborhood, about property values, about how long I'd lived there. At the time, I thought he was making conversation. I realize now he was calculating. My house sits in what was once a modest neighborhood called Willowbrook, but in the past decade, it had become one of the most desirable areas in our city. The tree-lined streets, the proximity to the university, and the historic charm had attracted young professionals and growing families. Property values had skyrocketed. What I'd bought for $40,000 in 1978 was now worth well over $1 million. But what Marcus didn't realize during that first dinner was that I didn't just own my house on Maple Street. I owned the entire subdivision. I hadn't always been wealthy. I'd been a secretary at Pemberton and Associates, a small but successful land development company, for 38 years. I started there at 22, fresh out of community college as a filing clerk. Mr. Harold Pemberton had been kind to me, promoting me to his personal assistant when my supervisor retired. I was efficient, discreet, and dedicated. I arrived early, stayed late, and never missed a day unless one of my children was sick. Mr. Pemberton never married, had no children, and treated his employees like family. When he started developing Willowbrook in the mid-70s, he offered his employees the chance to buy lots at cost. I scrimped and saved and bought not just one lot, but eventually, over the course of 20 years, I quietly purchased every available piece of property as the company expanded. Mr. Pemberton helped me structure the purchases through a private trust to minimize taxes and legal complications. When Mr. Pemberton passed away 15 years ago, I was shocked to discover he'd left me the entire company in his will. He'd been battling cancer for months but had kept it private. The letter he left for me explained that he'd watched me struggle. As a single mother, watched me work tirelessly not just for him but for my family, and he wanted to ensure I'd be taken care of. So there I was, at 53, suddenly the owner of a multi-million-dollar development company and, quietly, all the property in Willowbrook Subdivision. I'd kept the company running smoothly, even expanding it, but I'd been careful to keep a low profile. I didn't want my children to feel obligated to me because of money. I wanted their love to be genuine, not influenced by inheritance expectations. That decision was about to pay off in ways I never imagined. After Marcus and Jessica got engaged, I watched their relationship carefully. I noticed how Marcus always seemed to steer conversations toward money and status. He talked endlessly about his clients' million-dollar properties, about the importance of positioning yourself in the right circles, about how success was measured by your zip code and your address. During one family gathering, I overheard him telling Jessica that they needed to think strategically about their future. "Your mom's house is in a prime location," he said. "That lot alone has to be worth at least $2 million now. When she passes, that'll set us up perfectly for our future." I felt sick listening to him calculate my death and its financial benefits so casually, but I said nothing. I wanted to see what kind of man my daughter was really marrying. Over the next 3 years, Marcus's true nature revealed itself in small but telling ways. He began suggesting changes to our family traditions. He thought Mom's Christmas cookies were too rustic and preferred a more elegant dessert table. He felt the family Easter egg hunt was beneath his children's education level and suggested we hire entertainment instead. He gradually shifted family gatherings to his and Jessica's house, though he always remembered to include me, barely. I watched as Marcus slowly isolated Jessica from her siblings. He'd make snide comments about my son David's teaching salary, or my daughter Linda's choice to be a stay-at-home mom. He'd schedule trips or work events that conveniently conflicted with family gatherings. He was master craftsman at subtle manipulation, chipping away at family bonds while positioning himself as the reasonable, successful one. The first major incident happened 3 years ago at Thanksgiving. I'd prepared the meal as usual, but Marcus arrived 2 hours late with Jessica and their 2 children. When I asked if everything was all right, he launched into a speech about how family dinners needed to evolve with the times. "Eleanor," he said, using my first name instead of Mom, as he always did, "you put so much pressure on yourself with these elaborate meals. Jessica and I were thinking it might be better to just order from that new upscale catering place. Save you the work." When I politely declined, saying I enjoyed cooking for the family, he sighed dramatically. "This is exactly what I mean." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You're stuck in old patterns. Jessica and I are trying to build something more sophisticated for our children. The second incident was more pointed. Last Christmas, Marcus had arrived at my house and immediately begun rearranging the seating at my dining room table. "I think David and Linda should sit at the kids' table this year," he announced. "Jessica and I are having important conversations about our business expansion, and we need to be able to discuss adult topics." When I questioned this, David and Linda were both in their 40s with children of their own. Marcus fixed me with a cold stare. "Eleanor, as the primary contributors to this family's future prosperity, I think Jessica and I should be setting the tone for these gatherings." Primary contributors. The phrase lodged in my brain like a splinter. This man who lived in a house bought partially with money from Jessica's first job at my company, who drove a car financed through a loan I'd co-signed, who took vacations funded by the generous check I wrote them every birthday and Christmas, was positioning himself as the family provider. But it was the third incident, just last month at David's birthday party, that showed me Marcus's ultimate plan. I'd overheard him on a phone call in my kitchen, talking to someone about property investments. "Yeah, the old lady just keeps holding on to that house," he was saying. "Prime real estate, completely wasted on someone her age. Jessica keeps telling her she should downsize, but she's stubborn. Don't worry, though. We're working on it. We've got a long-term plan to get her into assisted living. Once we inherit the house, we'll flip it and move somewhere that actually matches our lifestyle." He saw me standing in the doorway, and his face went pale. We stared at each other for a long moment before he quickly ended his call. "Eleanor, I heard every word," I said quietly. He tried to backtrack, to claim I'd misunderstood, but I walked away. That was when I realized Marcus saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to what he considered his rightful inheritance. He didn't just want to take over Christmas dinner, he wanted to take over my entire life. After Jessica's call about Christmas, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the snow fall. At 68, I'd survived the death of my husband when my children were young, raised 3 kids on a secretary's salary, built a successful business, and maintained a close family. I'd faced every challenge with grace and determination. But this challenge was different. This wasn't about overcoming obstacles or working harder. This was about reclaiming my dignity from someone who saw me as disposable. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Margaret Chen, whom I'd known since. She was a junior associate handling paperwork for Mr. Pemberton. "Margaret," I said, "I think it's time we discussed making some changes to my estate planning." "Of course, Eleanor. What did you have in mind?" I looked out at my neighborhood, at the houses where families were probably discussing their own Christmas plans, at the streets I'd walked for 45 years, at the community I'd helped build. I want to revoke the trust structure for the Willowbrook properties. I want full control back. That's a significant decision. May I ask what's prompted this? I told her about the phone call, about the years of subtle manipulation, about the Christmas dinner that would proceed without me. Margaret listened without interrupting. "I understand," she said finally. "We can definitely restructure everything. In fact, with current property values and the development potential, you're sitting on considerably more than you might realize. The subdivision has appreciated enormously, and there are several properties that could be rezoned for commercial use." We scheduled a meeting for the following week. After hanging up, I did something I rarely allowed myself to do anymore. I cried. Not just from hurt, though the pain of Jessica's betrayal cut deep. I cried from relief. For too long, I'd been passive, watching Marcus chip away at our family dynamics while I maintained the peace for Jessica's sake. I'd convinced myself that love meant accepting whatever treatment my children chose to give me, that being a good mother meant being endlessly forgiving. But I was done being passive. I was done being grateful for scraps of attention from people who'd forgotten everything I'd done for them. I was done pretending that keeping family peace was more important than maintaining my own dignity. I had 2 weeks until Christmas. 2 weeks to remind my family, and especially my son-in-law, that underestimating a quiet, polite, 68-year-old woman was the biggest mistake Marcus Rodriguez would ever make. That evening, I called my other children. David answered. On the second ring, "Mom, how are you doing?" "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. What did Marcus tell you about Christmas this year?" There was a pause. "He said they were hosting, and that you might be too tired to do all that cooking anymore. He said Jessica thought you needed a break." "And did Jessica say this? Or did Marcus say that Jessica said this?" Another pause, longer this time. "Now that you mention it, I think it all came from Marcus." I called Linda next. Her story was the same. Marcus had contacted both of them, explaining that Mom was getting older and needed to step back from hosting duties. He'd framed it as concern for my well-being, while simultaneously making it clear that I wouldn't be invited to the dinner he was taking over. The final straw came the next day when I received a text from Jessica. It was a photo of Christmas decorations with the caption, "Getting the house ready for our first Christmas as hosts. Marcus has so many great ideas for starting new traditions." New traditions. As if our family hadn't been building beautiful traditions for decades. As if the memories we'd created over 25 years meant nothing. I texted back, "Beautiful decorations. I hope you have a lovely dinner." She responded immediately, "We'll miss you, Mom. Maybe next year we can include you." Maybe next year we can include you. Like I was a distant relative they occasionally remembered to invite, not the mother who'd given them everything. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I visited each of my rental properties in Willowbrook. As the owner, I had every right to inspect them, but I'd always believed in giving my tenants privacy and space. Today, however, I wanted to see my properties through new eyes. The first house I visited was occupied by the Pattersons, a young couple with twin babies. They'd lived there for 3 years and always paid their rent on time. Mrs. Patterson answered the door, looking surprised but pleased to see me. "Mrs. Walsh, is everything all right?" "Just doing some routine inspections," I said. "How are you finding the house? Any issues I should know about?" We chatted for a few minutes. They were happy, grateful tenants who loved the neighborhood. As I was leaving, Mrs. Patterson mentioned something interesting. "By the way, that man who came by last week asking about the property, does he work for you?" I stopped. "What man?" "He said he was in real estate. Marcus something? He was asking about our lease terms, whether we planned to stay long-term, what we paid in rent. I thought maybe you were selling the house or something." Marcus had been scouting my properties, calculating, planning. The anger that had been simmering in my chest began to boil. I visited 3 more properties that day. At 2 of them, tenants mentioned visits from a man matching Marcus's description. He'd been careful, claiming to be doing market research for potential buyers in the area. But I knew what he was really doing. He was building a business plan based on my assets, creating a future that didn't include me. That evening, I called Margaret Chen again. "Margaret, I need to ask you about something specific. If someone has been investigating my properties without my permission, gathering information about my tenants and rental income, could that constitute some form of harassment or invasion of privacy?" She was quiet for a moment. "Potentially, yes, especially if they're using false pretenses or if it's being done to intimidate or manipulate you. Are you dealing with something like this?" I told her about Marcus's visits to my properties. By the end of the conversation, Margaret was taking notes. "Eleanor, I think we need to document everything carefully. This behavior, combined with the Christmas situation, paints a disturbing picture. How do you want to handle this?" I knew exactly how I wanted to handle it. But first, I needed to gather more information. The next morning, I called David and Linda and asked them to meet me for lunch. We rarely met without Jessica, and both seemed confused by the request. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Linda asked as we settled into a booth at our usual diner. "I need to tell you both something, and I need to ask for your help." I explained everything. The phone call with Jessica, Marcus's investigation of my properties, the years of subtle manipulation and comments about my house and my future. I watched their expressions change from confusion to concern to anger. "That bastard," David said, his teacher's composure cracking. "Mom, why didn't you tell us this was happening?" "Because I hoped it would get better. Because I didn't want to put you in the middle. Because I thought maybe I was being too sensitive." Linda reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "You weren't being too sensitive. Jessica's been different. The past few years. More withdrawn from us, more critical. I thought it was just the stress of having kids, but now I think we need to have a conversation with our sister," David finished. "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. I have a plan, but I need you both to trust me and to let me handle this my way." They exchanged glances but nodded. "What do you need?" "Us to do?" Linda asked. "Just act normal. Don't mention this conversation to Jessica. And if Marcus or Jessica brings up Christmas, just tell them you're still deciding about your plans." David frowned. "Mom, you're not really going to spend Christmas alone, are you?" I squeezed his hand. "Don't worry about me. I have something very special planned for Christmas Day." That wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be. Over the next week, I threw myself into preparations. Not for Christmas dinner, for something much more important. I met with Margaret 3 more times, restructuring my holdings and creating new legal arrangements. I contacted my tenants to inform them of some upcoming changes. And I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator to document Marcus's visits to my properties and to gather information about his financial situation. The investigator, a sharp woman named Patricia Wong, called me 5 days later with her report. "Mrs. Walsh, your son-in-law is in more financial trouble than you might realize. That Mercedes, leased, the expensive watches and clothes, financed, through various credit arrangements. His real estate business has been struggling for the past 2 years. He's leveraged to the hilt, and he's been telling people that he's about to come into a significant property inheritance." "An inheritance," I repeated. "Yes, he's apparently been positioning himself as someone about to be very wealthy. He's used this expectation to secure credit and build business relationships. If that inheritance doesn't materialize, his house of cards falls down." Exactly. I thanked Patricia and hung up, feeling that familiar mix of anger and determination. Marcus hadn't just been manipulating my family dynamics. He'd been building a financial strategy based on my eventual death. 2 days before Christmas, Jessica called me again. "Mom, I wanted to check in. Are you doing okay? I know this Christmas is different, but—" "Jessica," I interrupted gently. "Can I ask you something? Do you remember the Christmas when you were 9, and we had to spend the holiday in that tiny apartment because we couldn't afford the heating bill for the house?" "Of course I remember." "And do you remember what I told you then?" She was quiet for a moment. "You said that Christmas wasn't about having the perfect house or the perfect dinner. You said it was about being together and being grateful for what we had. And do you still believe that?" "Yes," she said, but her voice was uncertain. "Then I have a question for you. Are you happy? Really, truly happy?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you go to bed at night, do you feel joy? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel like you're living the life you dreamed of?" She didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. "Mom," she finally said, and her voice cracked, "I just want everyone to be happy." "Sweetheart, you can't make everyone happy by making yourself miserable. It's not that simple. Jessica, I want you to know that whatever happens, I love you. I love you not because of what you do for me or what you give me, but because you're my daughter. And sometimes, Loving someone means letting them make their own choices, even when those choices hurt you. We ended the call there, and I spent the rest of the evening looking through photo albums. Pictures of Christmases past, of birthday, parties, of graduations and weddings and grandchildren's first steps. All of these memories had been created in love, had been given freely. Marcus could manipulate the present and try to control the future, but he couldn't take away the past. On Christmas Eve, I received a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas from your new house. Enjoy your retirement. Marcus. The text included a photo. It was a screenshot of a real estate listing, my house, labeled as coming soon with Marcus Rodriguez as the listing agent. But Marcus had made a crucial error. I wasn't retired, I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't going anywhere. I called Margaret Chen, even though it was Christmas Eve. Margaret, we need to move forward with everything we discussed. All of it. I want the notices prepared and delivered first thing tomorrow morning. Eleanor, are you sure? Once we take these steps, there's no going back. I looked around my kitchen, at the sugar cookies I'd been decorating alone, at the Christmas stockings hanging by the fireplace, including ones for Jessica and her children who wouldn't be there in the morning. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Christmas morning would be one that the Rodriguez family, and indeed all of Willowbrook, would never forget. Little did Marcus know that the old lady he'd been manipulating wasn't just any ordinary grandmother. She was the landlord of his entire world, and it was time for him to learn the true meaning of consequences. The game was about to change completely, and I held all the cards. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, with fresh snow covering Willowbrook like a pristine white blanket. I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee, watching the Rodriguez house across the street. Smoke curled from their chimney, and I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights through their windows. Inside, they were probably opening presents, children squealing with delight, the camera flashing as Marcus documented his first Christmas as the family host. They had no idea that in 15 minutes, their world would implode. At exactly 9:00, a black sedan pulled up to the Rodriguez house. Margaret Chen stepped out first, followed by 2 process servers and a moving truck. I watched as they approached the front door, official documents in hand. My phone rang. It was Jessica. Mom, there are people at our door with legal papers. They're saying something about eviction. What's happening? Merry Christmas, sweetheart, I said calmly. Perhaps you should let them in. Through my window, I saw Marcus answer the door, his face visible even from this distance. I watched his expression change from annoyance to confusion to something approaching panic as he read the documents thrust into his hands. The first notice was an eviction order, 72 hours to vacate the premises due to breach of rental agreement. The second was a notification that their rental property was being converted to a corporate housing facility, effective immediately. The third was a cease and desist order prohibiting Marcus from conducting any further investigations into my properties or tenants. But the fourth notice was the one that would truly shake them. It was a detailed accounting of every property in Willowbrook Subdivision, listing Eleanor Walsh as the sole owner of each address, including the house they called home. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Call me now. I set the phone aside and continued watching the scene unfold. Jessica had emerged from the house, still in her Christmas pajamas, holding baby Emma. The 2 older children, Tommy and Sarah, peered around her legs with worried faces. The moving truck crew was already unloading equipment, preparing for what would be a very busy day. David and Linda arrived at my house 20 minutes later, both looking shell-shocked. Mom, David said, barely containing his excitement and concern. Jessica called us. She's hysterical. Is it true? Do you really own their house? I own all. The houses in this neighborhood, I said simply, pouring them coffee. Sit down, Let me explain. Linda collapsed into a kitchen chair. How is this possible? You've been working as a secretary your whole life. I told them everything. About Mr. Pemberton, about the trust, about slowly acquiring property over decades, about keeping the inheritance quiet to protect their relationships with me, about discovering Marcus's true nature and his plans for my assets. Holy hell, David murmured. You're not just comfortable, you're wealthy. Comfortably wealthy, I corrected, and apparently that threatens some people. Linda's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and grimaced. It's Jessica. Answer. It, I said. Put it on speaker. Jessica's voice filled my kitchen, high-pitched and panicked. Linda, you have to talk to Mom. These people are saying we have to move out immediately. They're saying she owns our house. It has to be a mistake. Mom doesn't own anything except her house. Before Linda could respond, I heard Marcus in the background shouting, Tell them it's fraud. Eleanor couldn't afford this place. Someone's using her name. I took the phone from Linda. Jessica, calm down. Come to my house. Bring the children. We need to talk. Mom, what's happening? Marcus is saying this is some kind of mistake or scam. It's not a mistake. Come over, now. 20 minutes later, the entire Rodriguez family was crammed into my living room. Marcus had thrown a coat over his Christmas pajamas and was clutching the legal documents like they were evidence of a crime. Eleanor, he began, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this ends now. You can't just decide you own our house because you're angry about Christmas dinner. I studied him calmly. He was pacing my living room like a caged animal, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. Jessica sat on my couch with the baby, tears streaming down her face. The older children huddled close to her, confused and frightened. Sit down, Marcus, I said. I will not sit down. This is insane. You're a secretary. You can't afford to own half the neighborhood. Actually, I said, opening a folder Margaret had prepared, I own all of the neighborhood. Would you like to see the deeds? I spread the papers across my coffee table. Property deed after property deed, all bearing my name. Marcus's face went white as he saw his own address among them. Jessica spoke for the first time since arriving. Mom, I don't understand. How do you own our house? We've been paying rent for 5 years. To Willowbrook Property Management, I said gently. That's my company. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus sank into my armchair, looking like he might vomit. This is impossible, he whispered. Tommy, their 7-year-old, spoke up. Grammy, are we in trouble? Why is Daddy angry? I knelt down to his eye level. You're not in trouble, sweetheart. Daddy just learned some news that surprised him. Marcus suddenly exploded back to life. This is your doing, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. You've been planning this. You've been lying to us for years. I haven't lied about anything, Marcus. I simply haven't shared information that wasn't yours to know. Information that wasn't mine to know? We're family. Are we? I asked quietly. Because yesterday, you called me extended family. Yesterday, you decided I wasn't welcome. At Christmas dinner. Yesterday, you posted a photo suggesting my house was for sale. Jessica looked confused. What photo? Marcus's face reddened. I didn't post any photo. I showed them the text message with the real estate listing. Jessica asped. Marcus, you made a listing for Mom's house? It wasn't a real listing, he stammered. I was just... You were just assuming I'd be dead soon, I finished calmly. You've been planning my life for me, deciding when I should move to assisted living, when I should sell my house, how to distribute my assets. You've been investigating my properties, questioning my tenants, building a business plan based on inheriting my estate. The room was silent except for baby Emma's soft cooing. Even the older children seemed to understand that something momentous was happening. Patricia Wong, the private investigator, had prepared a comprehensive report on Marcus's activities. I handed it to Jessica. Your husband has been to every rental property I own. He's been asking my tenants about lease terms, about me, about whether I ever visit. He's been telling his business associates that he's about to inherit significant property assets. Jessica read the report, her face growing paler with each page. Marcus, is this true? I was just trying to understand Eleanor's financial situation, he said defensively. As your husband, I need to know about your family's assets for our future planning. My assets are not your family's assets, I said firmly, and my future is not yours to plan. David, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. Marcus, let me get this straight. You banned our mother from Christmas dinner because you see her as a burden. You've been telling people you're going to inherit her property. You made a fake real estate listing for her house, and now you're angry that she's protecting herself? She's destroying our family, Marcus shot back. No, Linda said, her teacher's voice cutting through the chaos. You are. You've been manipulating and isolating Mom for years. You've turned Jessica against us. You've treated our mother like she's already dead. Jessica looked up from the investigator's report, tears flowing freely. Mom, is all this true? About the comments? About pushing you out? I sat beside her and took her hand. Sweetheart, do you remember the conversation we had yesterday? About happiness? She nodded weakly. When was the last time you made a decision about our family without Marcus's input? When was the last time you spent time with your siblings without Marcus there? When was the last time you felt truly comfortable being yourself? Jessica's lip trembled. I don't remember. Marcus stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Eleanor, you want to play hardball? Fine. We'll fight this eviction. I know lawyers, too. With what money? I asked. Patricia's investigation revealed your financial situation, Marcus. You're leveraged to the hilt. You've been living on credit, using the promise of inheriting my property as collateral. His face went ashen. But here's what's really going to happen, I continued, standing and walking to my window. In 72 hours, you'll leave my property. You can find somewhere else to live, somewhere you can actually afford. The moving truck outside will help you pack. Mom, Jessica whispered, where will we go? I turned back to my daughter, my heart breaking for her and the children. You and the children are welcome to stay here. Marcus exploded. Absolutely not. You're not taking my family. I'm not taking anyone, I said calmly. I'm offering my daughter and grandchildren a home. You're welcome to be part of that, but only if you can treat me with the respect I deserve. Respect? Marcus laughed bitterly. You've humiliated us. You've destroyed our Christmas. I haven't destroyed anything that wasn't already broken, I replied. You destroyed Christmas when you decided I wasn't welcome at the family table. You destroyed respect when you started planning my death and your inheritance. You destroyed trust when you began investigating my properties behind my back. Sarah, their 10-year-old, started crying. The sound of her tears broke something in the room. Tommy stood up and walked over to me. Grammy, I don't understand why everyone's fighting. I just want Christmas. I picked him up, feeling his small body trembling. I know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and it takes time to fix them. Jessica looked at Marcus, then at her children, then at me. Something in her expression shifted. Marcus, she said quietly, we should accept Mom's offer. Absolutely not. I will not be beholden to someone who... Someone who what? Jessica interrupted, and for the first time in years, I heard steel in her voice. Someone who raised 3 children. Alone? Someone who worked multiple jobs to put us through college? Someone who helped us buy our first car? Who co-signed our loans? Who babysits our children for free? Marcus stared at her, clearly shocked by her sudden assertion. Someone, Jessica continued, standing with baby Emma in her arms, who just found out her son-in-law has been telling people she'll be dead soon and planning to sell her property? Someone who discovered her own daughter was willing to exclude her from Christmas dinner? The room fell silent again. Jessica walked to the window and looked out at the moving truck, at the legal team still coordinating outside. 5 years ago, I fell in love with a man who seemed successful and charming, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. But over time, I've watched that man isolate me from my family. I've watched him manipulate situations to get what he wants. I've watched him calculate the value of my mother's life like she's a stock portfolio. She turned back to Marcus. I'm staying here with the children. Marcus's face cycled through several emotions before settling on rage. Fine! You want to crawl back to Mommy? Go ahead, but don't expect me to support this family from whatever apartment I can afford. Marcus, David said, standing up. You've never supported this family. Eleanor's been subsidizing your lifestyle for years. This was information I hadn't shared with David and Linda before, but the investigator had uncovered it. The down payment for Marcus and Jessica's cars had come from a check I'd written them for Christmas 2 years ago. The private school tuition for Tommy and Sarah was covered by money I'd been sending Jessica monthly, which she'd passed on to Marcus to manage. Marcus looked like he might explode. That's different. That's family helping family. No, I said firmly. That's family taking advantage of family, and it stops now. What happened next surprised everyone. Margaret Chen, who had been quietly observing from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward with another set of documents. Before this conversation goes any further, she said professionally, there are additional matters to address. She handed Marcus a thick envelope. These are financial disclosures related to your business activities. You've been using Mrs. Walsh's property as collateral for various business loans without her knowledge or consent. Marcus went rigid. What are you talking about? Your real estate company listed Mrs. Walsh's properties as anticipated assets when applying for business loans and lines of credit. You've essentially been fraud, Mr. Rodriguez. The color drained from his face completely. Margaret continued. We've also documented several instances where you've collected rental deposits from prospective tenants for properties you don't own, telling them you're the property manager for Willowbrook. Jessica stared at her husband in horror. Marcus, what is she talking about? It's not. I wasn't. Marcus sank into the chair again, his shoulders slumping. Linda picked up one of the documents and read aloud. Brazos Business Credit. Loan application dated 6 months ago. Anticipated inheritance of multiple rental properties in Willowbrook Subdivision. Estimated value $2 million. Signed by Marcus Rodriguez. $8.2 million, David repeated slowly. You've been telling people Mom's estate is worth over $8 million? Actually, I said quietly, he was fairly close. Everyone turned to stare at me. Between the property values in Willowbrook, the expansion properties, and the business, the total worth is approximately $11 million. You could have heard a pin drop. Tommy whispered, Grammy, what's $1 million? Before anyone could answer, Marcus suddenly stood up and headed for the door. I'm not listening to any more of this insanity. Marcus, Margaret called after him. We're not finished. Yes, we are, he said without turning around. After he left, the room felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. Jessica sank back onto the couch, looking exhausted. Mom, she said softly, I owe you an enormous apology. I sat beside her and put my arm around her shoulders. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You've been in an impossible situation. I should have seen it. I should have realized what he was doing. Manipulation is insidious, Linda said gently. It happens slowly, over time. You gradually adjust to each small boundary crossing until you don't remember where the original boundaries were. David nodded. We all saw changes in you over the years, but we didn't know how to help. Jessica looked at each of us. I've missed you all so much. I didn't even realize how isolated I'd become. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. The moving teams worked to carefully pack the Rodriguez belongings. Jessica made the difficult decision to take the children to stay with her friend, Amy, for a few days while the immediate chaos settled. David and Linda helped coordinate the logistics, acting as buffers between Jessica and the legal teams. By evening, the Rodriguez house stood empty. Jessica had taken the children to Amy's house, promising to return the next day to talk more. The legal teams had departed, leaving behind neatly organized stacks of paperwork. The neighborhood, which had been buzzing with activity all day, finally settled into quiet. I sat in my kitchen as the sun set, looking at the pile of Christmas presents I'd had wrapped for Jessica's family. They were still under my tree, unopened. Tomorrow, I would take them to Amy's house. Tonight, I would simply sit with the reality of what had transpired. My phone rang. It was Jessica. Mom, are you alone? Yes, sweetheart. I want you to know that what happened today, it changed everything for me. Not just the money revelation, but seeing how Marcus treated you. Watching his reaction when he realized you weren't powerless. How are the children? Confused but resilient. Tommy keeps asking if Grammy is really rich, and Sarah wants to know if we'll get to see you for New Year's. I smiled despite everything. Of course, we'll make new traditions. Mom, there's something else. After we left your house, Marcus called me. My stomach tightened. What did he say? He said this wasn't over. He said you'd made a powerful enemy and that he wasn't going to just disappear. I'd been expecting this. Men like Marcus don't simply accept defeat and move on. They double down. They retaliate. They look for weaknesses to exploit. Did he say anything specific? He said he knows things about Willowbrook properties that could bring everything crashing down. He said you weren't as smart as you thought you were. I considered this. Marcus had access to financial records through his relationship with Jessica. He'd seen property management documents, observed my business operations from the inside. What could he possibly think he knew that would threaten me? Jessica, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to gather any documents Marcus might have been keeping related to Willowbrook properties. Any business records, financial statements, anything he might have copied or saved. You think he took something? I think he's the kind of man who always has a backup plan. That night, I called Margaret Chen at home. Eleanor, how are you holding up? I'm fine, but we might have a problem. Marcus made some threats to Jessica about bringing everything crashing down. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I'll contact our investigative accountant first thing tomorrow. We should audit everything. Make sure there are no vulnerabilities. There's something else, I said. Over the years, Marcus has had access to a lot of information through Jessica. Bank statements, property records, business documents. If he copied anything. We'll handle it, Margaret assured me. Eleanor, you did the right thing today. What Marcus was doing was a form of financial elder abuse. You protected yourself and your assets. After hanging up, I stood in my living room, looking at the Christmas tree with its unopened presents. 47 years ago, I'd brought home my first daughter as a single mother. I'd thought the hardest parts of parenting were behind me. I was beginning to realize I'd been wrong. The next morning brought new developments. Margaret called at 8 o'clock with disturbing news. Eleanor, Marcus filed several reports overnight. He's claiming you're mentally incompetent and that your property dealings are evidence of diminished capacity. He's also filed a complaint with the state a state commission alleging fraudulent business practices. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Based on what evidence? He's claiming you've been operating under multiple business names without proper disclosure, that you've misrepresented yourself to tenants, and that your sudden decision to evict him proves you're not thinking clearly. And the mental competency challenge? He's petitioned for a court-ordered psychological evaluation. He's claiming that your behavior over the past week shows irrational decision-making and possible elder abuse by unnamed family members. I had to hand it to Marcus. He was fighting back with everything he had, using the legal system to tie me up and cast doubt on my competency. It was a smart strategy if his goal was to create enough chaos to derail my plans. What's our next step? We fight back twice as hard, Margaret said grimly. I'm calling an emergency meeting for this afternoon. We need to prepare a comprehensive response that not only defends your actions, but demonstrates exactly what kind of man Marcus Rodriguez really is. Jessica arrived at my house around noon, looking haggard but determined. She carried a large box with her. I found these in our home office safe, she said, setting the box on my kitchen table. Financial. Records, copies of property documents, and some things I don't understand. We went through the box together. What we found was shocking. Marcus had been keeping meticulous records, but not for the reasons I'd initially thought. He had indeed been planning to inherit my property, but he'd also been planning something far more sophisticated. There were detailed floor plans of every property in Willowbrook, market analyses projecting property values 5 years into the future. Most disturbing were the preliminary agreements with developers, dated just 2 months ago, discussing the potential for rezoning the entire subdivision for commercial use. Mom, Jessica said quietly, he was going to tear down the whole neighborhood. I studied the documents. Marcus had been researching the process for changing zoning laws, for convincing a city council to approve commercial development, for transforming Willowbrook from a residential community into a commercial district. The potential profits were staggering. If he could have inherited my properties and successfully rezoned them, he could have sold to developers for tens of millions of dollars. He wasn't just planning to inherit your house, Jessica continued, her voice hollow. He was planning to destroy everything you built. That afternoon, Margaret's team assembled in my living room. Margaret, Patricia Wong, 2 additional attorneys, and the investigative accountant formed what looked like a war council. Based on what we've discovered, Margaret began, Marcus Rodriguez's strategy is becoming clear. He's going to claim that Eleanor's actions are evidence of manipulation by other family members, possibly suggesting that David or Linda convinced her to evict Jessica's family for their own benefit. David shook his head. That's insane. We just learned about any of this yesterday. It doesn't matter what's true, one of the other attorneys explained. It matters what can be argued in court. Marcus is trying to create a narrative where Eleanor is either mentally incompetent or being manipulated by greedy children. Patricia spoke up. There's something else. We've traced some of Marcus's financial activities. He's not just leveraged personally. His business has been operating with significant debt for over 2 years. The only thing keeping him solvent has been the promise to investors that he has access to property worth millions. Access to property, I repeated. Not ownership. Exactly. He's been taking money from investors, essentially promising to flip properties he doesn't own. Margaret nodded grimly. Which means he's perpetrated fraud against multiple parties. But it also means he's desperate. If he can't produce the properties he's promised, he's looking at criminal charges. I understood now why Marcus had fought so viciously. This wasn't just about being kicked out of a house or losing face at Christmas dinner. His entire financial house of cards was built on the assumption that he would inherit my properties. Without them, he faced financial ruin and possibly jail time. So what do? Linda asked. Margaret smiled, and it wasn't a warm expression. We go on the offensive. The plan was comprehensive. We would file countersuits for the fraud Marcus had committed. We would provide evidence of his financial manipulation and the premature real estate listing. We would document his investigation of my properties and his unauthorized use of my assets as collateral. Most importantly, we would demonstrate that far from being mentally incompetent, I had been making shrewd, protective decisions to safeguard assets that Marcus had been attempting to steal. "Eleanor," Margaret said, "we're going to need you to undergo the psychological evaluation he's requested. I know it's invasive and insulting, but we need to remove that weapon from his arsenal." "I understand." Dr. Sarah Chen, an excellent forensic psychologist, will conduct the evaluation. It will be thorough, but I'm confident it will demonstrate your complete competency. Over the next 3 days, the legal battle intensified. Marcus had hired an aggressive attorney who seemed determined to make my life as difficult as possible. They filed motion after motion, requested document after document, and generally did everything possible to tie up the proceedings. But we had advantages they didn't expect. The investigative work had uncovered a paper trail of Marcus's fraudulent activities that painted a damning picture. More significantly, several of his investors had come forward when they learned about the eviction, wanting to know what was happening to their money. On Thursday, Margaret received a call that changed everything. "Eleanor," she said, barely containing her excitement, "the FBI wants to talk to you." "The FBI?" Marcus's investor fraud appears to be more extensive than we realized. They've been building a case against his company for several months. Your situation has provided them with additional evidence they needed. The FBI interview was surreal. I sat in a federal building, answering questions about my son-in-law's business practices while federal agents took notes. They seemed particularly interested in the documents Jessica had found in the safe. "Mrs. Walsh," one agent said, "you may have prevented a much larger fraud. There's evidence that Mr. Rodriguez was planning to use rezoning schemes to defraud investors of tens of millions of dollars." When I returned home that evening, I found Jessica waiting for me. She looked different somehow, stronger. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "I've decided to file for divorce." I studied her face. "Are you sure?" "I've been sure for a long time. I just didn't know how to do it, or where I would go, or how I would support the children." She smiled sadly. "Finding out that my mother owns half the city certainly changes the calculation." We sat together in my kitchen, sharing a pot of tea as the winter darkness settled around us. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Keeping the secret about the money?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it took a crisis to reveal people's true characters. But I don't regret protecting my assets or protecting you children from the complications of knowing about inheritance while you were building your own lives. Marcus will never forgive this." "No," I agreed. "I don't expect he will." What I didn't know was that Marcus had one more card to play, and it would arrive on New Year's Eve in a way none of us could have anticipated. But that's a story for tomorrow. New Year's Eve arrived with the kind of bone-deep cold that makes you question every life decision. I was preparing dinner for Jessica and the children, who had moved back into their old rooms at my house, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize holding what appeared to be an oversized envelope. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm required to deliver this personally." He handed me the envelope and left quickly, as if he didn't want to be associated with whatever was inside. The return address made my stomach drop. Westside Legal Associates, Marcus's new legal team. Inside were papers that made my hands shake as I read them. Marcus was suing for half my estate. The legal argument was creative. I had to give him that. He claimed that because Jessica was his wife, and he had been operating under the assumption that her family possessed significant assets when making major financial decisions, he was entitled to what amounted to spousal rights to inheritance expectations. He was arguing that I had deliberately concealed assets to defraud him of his rightful future inheritance through marriage. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached to the lawsuit was a document that made my blood run cold, a petition to place Jessica under psychiatric hold, claiming she was suffering from battered woman syndrome and was being manipulated by family members into making decisions against her own interests. I read the petition twice before the full implications hit me. Marcus wasn't just going after my money anymore. He was going after Jessica's custody of the children. Jessica walked into the kitchen just as I was calling Margaret. One look at my face, and she knew something was terribly wrong. What happened? I handed her the papers. She read through them, her face growing paler with each page, until she reached the psychiatric hold petition. Then she dropped into a chair like her legs had given out. "He's trying to have me committed," she whispered. "Over my dead body," I said firmly. Margaret's voice came through the phone speaker. "Eleanor, I need you both to come to my office, immediately. And Jessica, pack a bag for yourself and the children. Take them somewhere Marcus doesn't know about tonight." "What's happening?" Tommy asked from the kitchen doorway, holding baby Emma's hand. Sarah followed behind them, her 10-year-old face creased with worry. Jessica quickly composed herself. "We're going to visit Aunt Linda tonight, a sleepover." The children cheered, too young to recognize the forced cheer in their mother's voice. An hour later, we sat in Margaret's office while the children played in the firm's conference room under the supervision of Margaret's assistant. The situation was worse than I'd initially understood. "The psychiatric hold petition is scheduled for an emergency hearing tomorrow morning," Margaret explained. "Marcus is claiming that Jessica's decision to leave him and move in with Eleanor demonstrates she's not thinking clearly. He's produced evidence that she's been under what he calls undue influence." "What evidence?" I asked. Margaret showed us a thick folder. Photos of the legal proceedings on Christmas Day, documentation of the eviction, records showing the sudden change in Willowbrook Properties management. He's painting a picture of a vulnerable woman being manipulated by a wealthy mother who suddenly revealed hidden assets. Jessica stared at the papers. "But none of that proves I'm mentally ill." "It doesn't have to," Margaret said grimly. "Emergency psychiatric holds have a low bar. The judge only needs to believe there's potential danger to yourself or others, or evidence of severely impaired decision-making." I felt rage building in my chest. This is about the children. Exactly. If Jessica is placed on psychiatric hold, Marcus automatically gets emergency custody. And once he has custody, it becomes much harder to reverse. The full scope of Marcus's strategy was becoming clear. He'd realized he couldn't get my money directly, so he was going to use the children as leverage. He would take the kids, then negotiate from a position of power. Either I gave him what he wanted, or I'd lose access to my grandchildren. "What are our options?" Jessica asked. Margaret leaned forward. "We fight. Hard. We've been gathering evidence of Marcus's financial crimes, but now we need to pivot to documenting his fitness as a parent. We need to show that he's the one who poses a danger." Patricia Wong, our private investigator, had been silent through this discussion. Now she spoke up. "I've been tracking Marcus since Christmas. You need to see what I found." She opened her laptop and showed us surveillance photos. Marcus entering a casino on 3 separate nights since Christmas. Marcus meeting with known loan sharks. Marcus in heated arguments with several men who looked like they weren't in the lending business for the interest rates. "He's in debt to dangerous people," Patricia explained. "The same investors he defrauded. They want their money back, and they're not patient people." Margaret studied the photos. "This changes things. We can argue that Marcus poses a danger to the children because of his criminal associates." "There's more," Patricia continued. "I've been investigating the timeline of when Marcus first started planning this inheritance scheme. It goes back further than we thought." She pulled up financial records on her laptop. Marcus began researching Eleanor's property ownership 6 months after he started dating Jessica. The first loan applications using anticipated inheritance as collateral were filed 2 years before they got married. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "He married me for money he thought my mother had," Jessica said quietly. "He never loved me. He loved what he thought I could give him." I reached over and took her hand. She was trembling. "There's something else," Patricia said, her voice gentle. "I found records of Marcus's previous relationships. 3 other women, all from wealthy families. 2 of those relationships ended when the families didn't have as much money as he initially believed." Jessica closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was a steel there I hadn't seen in years. "I want him destroyed," she said quietly. "Not just defeated, destroyed." The emergency hearing was scheduled for 9 the next morning. I spent the night at Linda's house with Jessica and the children, all of us crowded into her guest room. None of us slept much. At 6 a.m., Margaret called. "There's been a development. Marcus was arrested 3 hours ago." "What?" "One of his, creditors lost patience." Marcus was caught trying to break into Willowbrook Properties office, presumably looking for documents that could help his case. He's charged with breaking and entering, and the judge has pushed the psychiatric hearing to next week. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. "Eleanor, there's something else. We received a call from Child Protective Services. Someone filed an anonymous report claiming Jessica and the children are living in unsafe conditions at your..." Marcus wasn't giving up. Even from jail, he was finding ways to attack us. The CPS visit happened that afternoon. A social worker named Maria Santos came to my house, and I could tell within minutes that she wasn't buying whatever Marcus had claimed. "I'm required to follow up on all reports," she explained to Jessica. "But I'll be honest with you. The anonymous call raised some red flags. The caller seemed to know an unusual amount of specific details about your family situation." She toured the house, speaking with the children briefly, and reviewed the living arrangements. By the end of the visit, she was clearly frustrated. "Whoever made this report wasted my time," Maria said bluntly. "Your children are clearly healthy, happy, and well cared for. The house is immaculate and there's no sign of any unsafe conditions." She paused at the door. "Off the record, you might want to document everything very carefully right now. These kinds of harassment campaigns usually escalate before they get better." That evening, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. "I'm bailing Marcus out of jail," I announced. Jessica stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What? Why?" "Because as long as he's in jail, he's a victim. He can claim he's being persecuted, that we're using our wealth and influence to deny him his rights." I sat down across from her. "But if he's free, with unlimited rope, he'll hang himself." David, who had come for dinner, frowned. "Mom, that sounds dangerous." "Everything about this situation is dangerous," I replied. "But I'd rather face an enemy I can see coming than one hidden behind legal maneuvers." I called Margaret with my decision. After some argument, she agreed. "If we're going to do this, we do it right," she said. "We'll have surveillance on him 24/7 once he's released, and we'll use his freedom to gather evidence of his ongoing pattern of harassment." Marcus was released on a $15,000 bond the next day. I paid it personally and made sure he knew who had bailed him out. His first call was to Jessica. I listened on speaker as he alternated between threats and attempts at emotional manipulation. "Jessica, I don't understand why you're doing this." "To our family," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I know your mother has poisoned you against me, but think about the children. They need their father. The children need a father who doesn't try to have their mother committed." "Out of spite," Jessica responded calmly. "I'm worried about you," Marcus continued. "Living with Eleanor, isolated from anyone who might give you objective advice. It's not healthy." "I'm healthier now than I've been in years," Jessica said. "I can make decisions without checking with..." "You first," I can see my siblings without you criticizing them. I can breathe. That last word seemed to break something in Marcus. His voice turned cold and ugly. You think this is over? You think your mother's money protects you? I have friends, Jessica. People who understand that sometimes families need to be reunited by any means necessary. The line went dead. Jessica stared at the phone, her face pale. Mom, what did he mean by any means necessary? I thought about the photos Patricia had shown us. Marcus's criminal associates, his mounting debts, the desperate look in his eyes when his financial scheme had been exposed. It means, I said, slowly, that we're moving to the next phase of this war. I called an emergency family meeting that night. David, Linda, Jessica, and I sat around my dining room table that had hosted so many happy family gatherings. Now, it felt like a war. Counsel, Marcus is escalating, I began. He's moved from legal challenges to direct threats. We need to assume he'll follow through. What kind of threats are we talking about? David asked. Before I could answer, Linda's phone buzzed. She looked at it and frowned. That's strange. It's a text from someone claiming to be a parent at Sarah and Tommy's school. They're saying the school received an anonymous call claiming the children are in danger. My blood ran cold. He's going to try to take them from school. Jessica jumped up. I need to call the principal. Wait, I said. Let's think this through. If Marcus is planning to take the children, we need to be smarter than just warning the school. I called Patricia Wong. Within an hour, she arrived with a security specialist named James Crawford. Based on your description of the threats, James said, I recommend we treat this as a potential kidnapping situation. Your son-in-law is desperate, financially ruined, and has criminal connections. The children are his only leverage now. We spent 2 hours planning security protocols. The children would be accompanied by private security to and from school. Our homes would have alarm systems upgraded. Patricia would maintain surveillance on Marcus and his known associates. There's one more thing, James said as he was leaving. You might want to consider the psychological warfare aspect. Marcus wants you to feel threatened, to make mistakes because you're scared. Don't give him that satisfaction. That night, as I tucked Tommy and Sarah into bed, Tommy asked a question that broke my heart. Grammy, are the bad men going to try to hurt us? I sat on the edge of his bed. There are some people who are angry with Mommy and me right now, but we have lots of good people helping us stay safe. Like superheroes? Sarah asked. Exactly like superheroes, I said, kissing her forehead. After the children were asleep, Jessica and I sat in my kitchen. She was holding a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Mom, I'm scared, she admitted. Not just for myself, but for the kids. What if Marcus really tries to take them? Then we'll stop him, I said simply. How can you be so calm? I smiled, remembering something Mr. Pemberton had told me years ago. Do you know what your biggest advantage is in any conflict? She shook her head. You have more to lose than your enemy does. That makes you more careful, more thorough, more determined. Marcus is fighting for money and ego. We're fighting for family. The next day brought news that changed everything again. Margaret called, with an update that made me question whether I'd been wrong about Marcus's capabilities. Eleanor, we have a problem. Marcus has filed an emergency custody motion claiming that you're involving the children in a dangerous situation by hiring private security. He's arguing that the presence of security guards proves the children are in danger, and therefore they should be placed in his custody for their own protection. I stared at the phone. He forced us to hire security by threatening us, and now he's using the security as evidence that we're unfit guardians? It's diabolical, but it might work, Margaret admitted. Emergency custody laws are designed to remove children from danger quickly. The judge might decide that the safest place for them is with their father, away from whatever threat requires. armed guards. When is the hearing? Tomorrow afternoon. I felt something inside me harden. Marcus had been outmaneuvering us because we'd been playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. Margaret, I want you to subpoena Marcus's financial records for the past 5 years. All of them. Bank statements, credit applications, business records, everything. Eleanor, we already have most of that. I want you to focus on one specific thing. I want you to find every lie he told on every application, every document he forged, every fraudulent statement he made. I paused, thinking. And I want you to find out who his cellmate was when he was in jail. I have a feeling that conversation might have been recorded. Margaret was quiet for a moment. What are you planning? I'm planning to remind Marcus that the house always wins. And right now, I am the house. That evening, while Patricia worked on surveillance and Margaret gathered financial records, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I called in favors. Over 38 years of working at Pemberton and Associates, I'd helped a lot of people. Building permits expedited, zoning issues resolved, business licenses processed. I'd been the efficient, reliable person who made things happen behind the scenes. Now it was time to see what those years of service had earned me. My first call was to Judge Patricia Hensley, who had been a junior prosecutor when I'd helped her navigate city bureaucracy for her first housing purchase. Eleanor Walsh, she said warmly when I identified myself. How wonderful to hear from you. I heard about Harold's passing. I'm so sorry for your loss. We chatted briefly about mutual acquaintances before I explained my situation. Patricia, I'm not asking you to influence any proceedings. I just want to make sure that when Judge Morrison hears custody arguments tomorrow, he has all the relevant information about Marco Rodriguez's character. I understand, she said carefully, and I appreciate you calling me directly rather than trying to work behind the scenes. That tells me you're seeking justice, not advantage. My second call was to City Councilman Robert Chen, Margaret's brother, whom I'd helped years ago when his small business needed a variance to operate in its location. Mrs. Walsh, of course I remember you. You probably saved my restaurant. I explained Marcus's plan to rezone Willowbrook for commercial development, and how he'd been misrepresenting his relationship to my properties. I wanted to make sure the council was aware that any future zoning proposals from Marcus Rodriguez should be viewed with extreme skepticism. He has no authority to speak for Willowbrook Properties. I appreciate the heads up. Let me make some calls. By 9 o'clock, I had spoken to 6 different people in various positions of influence around the city. I wasn't asking anyone to break rules or show favoritism. I was simply ensuring that people who mattered knew the truth about Marcus Rodriguez. The custody hearing the next day was unlike anything I'd experienced. Marcus arrived with his attorney, and what appeared to be a new suit, probably the first thing he'd purchased since being bailed out of jail. He looked confident, which worried me. Judge Morrison read through the emergency custody motion and the supporting documents. Marcus's attorney argued that the children were being exposed to dangerous situations, citing the presence of private security and the ongoing legal battles. Your Honor, the attorney said, these children have been thrust into a situation involving federal investigations, anonymous threats, and now armed security personnel. Mr. Rodriguez simply wants his children removed from this chaos and placed in a stable environment. Our attorney responded by presenting evidence of Marcus's financial crimes and the credible threats he'd made. But I could see the judge was concerned about the children's immediate safety. Then Margaret surprised everyone by calling a witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. Carl Davidson to the stand. Carl was Marcus's cellmate from his brief stay in jail. A small-time embezzler who was hoping for a reduced sentence, he had been more than willing to testify about the conversations he'd overheard. Mr. Rodriguez spent our entire time together planning, Carl testified. He said the only way to get what he deserved from his wife's family was to take the kids. He said rich people always cave when children are involved. He paused, looking uncomfortable. He also talked about some people he knew who owed him favors and could help him disappear, with the kids if necessary. He showed me photos of houses in countries that don't extradite. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Marcus's confident expression cracked, but Carl wasn't finished. He also bragged about bankrupting several previous girlfriends, families by exposing their financial secrets to the right people. He had this whole system for finding wealthy women and exploiting them. Judge Morrison's expression grew thunderous. "Are you stating under oath that Mr. Rodriguez explicitly planned to kidnap his children and flee the country?" "Yes, Your Honor. He had maps, travel documents, everything. He said people like his wife's family couldn't fight if they didn't know where the kids were." Marcus shot to his feet. "This is completely false. This man is a criminal lying for a deal." "Sit down, Mr. Rodriguez," Judge Morrison said coldly. "Mr. Davidson, do you have any physical evidence of these claims?" Carl smiled nervously and pulled out a small device. "I recorded some of our conversations. Prison recording policy doesn't apply to personal devices inmates manage to acquire." The recording was played. Marcus's voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable, detailing his plans to take the children and leverage them for money. The conversation included specific details about flight schedules and offshore bank accounts. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and decisive. Not only was Marcus's emergency custody motion denied, but he was also barred from unsupervised contact with the children pending a full investigation. The court ordered immediate protective services for Jessica and the children. But as we left the courthouse, I noticed something troubling. Marcus wasn't upset by the ruling. If anything, he looked satisfied. Patricia Wong met us in the parking lot with urgent news. "Eleanor, we have a problem. While we were in court, someone broke into your house." My blood went cold. The house is supposed to be alarmed. It was, but they knew exactly how to disable it. We drove to my house to find police cars in my driveway. A detective named Sandra Mills met us at the door. "Nothing appears to be stolen," she explained. "But someone was definitely here." They went through every room methodically. We walked through the house. Everything was exactly as we'd left it, but there was an unsettling feeling of violation. "What were they looking for?" Jessica asked. That's when I realized what Marcus had done. The custody hearing, the emergency motion, even the threats about taking the children. It had all been a distraction. He wasn't trying to get custody today, I said slowly. He was making sure we'd all be out of the house at a specific time. I rushed to my home office. My safe was still locked, but there were scratches around the lock mechanism. More importantly, my desk had been searched. "He was looking for something specific," I murmured, checking my files. Then I saw it. A gap in my filing cabinet where a particular folder should have been. "He took the Pemberton Trust documents," I said, my voice hollow. Those documents contained information about how my inheritance had been structured, including details about shell companies and offshore accounts that Mr. Pemberton had established for tax purposes, legitimate and legal, but potentially complicated to explain if taken out of context. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Eleanor," Marcus's voice came through the speaker. "I think we should meet. I think you should turn yourself in. For breaking and entering." He laughed. "That's interesting coming from someone with so many interesting financial arrangements. Did you know that shell companies used to hide income can be considered money laundering under certain federal statutes?" I felt ice in my veins. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want what was always mine. But now my price has gone up. I want half your estate, full custody of my children, and a written acknowledgement that you manipulated Jessica into leaving me." "And if I refuse?" "Then tomorrow morning, copies of some very interesting documents will be delivered to the FBI. IRS, and several news outlets. The media loves stories about wealthy widows hiding money offshore. The line went dead. I looked around the room at Jessica, Margaret, and the police detective. Everyone was staring at me. "Well," I said calmly, "I guess it's time for the final round." But first, I had a phone call to make. It was time to cash in one more favor, the biggest one I'd ever asked for. The person who answered would change everything. The phone number I dialed belonged to someone I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, but who owed me a debt that had never been repaid. "Harrison Sterling," the voice answered, crisp and authoritative. "Harry, it's Eleanor Walsh. I need to collect on that favor you owe me." There was a long pause. Harry Sterling was now the regional director of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. 15 years ago, he had been a junior agent struggling to make his mortgage payments while supporting his sick daughter. I had quietly helped him through that difficult time, asking nothing in return. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice had warmed considerably. "I heard about Harold's passing. I'm very sorry. He was a good man." "He was. Harry, I'm in a situation that requires your particular expertise." I explained everything, keeping my voice steady and professional. Marcus's financial fraud, his threats against my family, and now his attempt to use stolen documents to extort me. "Eleanor, if what you're telling me is accurate, this man has committed multiple federal crimes. The wire fraud alone could put him away for years. I need this handled quickly and decisively, Harry. He's threatened to harm my family if his demands aren't met." "Where are you now?" "At my home. He's supposed to call me in 12 hours with instructions." "Don't answer that call. We'll be in touch within 6 hours." After hanging up, I turned to face the room full of worried faces. "Who was that, Mom?" Jessica asked. "An old friend who specializes in dealing with financial criminals." I walked to the window and looked out, at the neighborhood I'd spent decades building. Marcus made one critical error in his planning. "What's that?" Margaret asked. "He assumed I was just a sweet old lady with money and no connections." I smiled grimly. "He never bothered to find out how I made those connections." "Detective." Mills looked intrigued. "Mrs. Walsh, are you saying you know people in law enforcement?" "I know people in many places, Detective. 38 years of helping people when they needed it most tends to create a network." Over the next few hours, my house became a command center. FBI agents arrived quietly, setting up surveillance equipment and preparing for Marcus's call. Agent Sterling brought a team of specialists in financial crimes and extortion cases. "Mrs. Walsh," he said privately, "I want you to know that based on the evidence you've provided, we already had an ongoing investigation into Mr. Rodriguez's activities. Your situation has accelerated our timeline." "What does that mean?" "It means Mr. Rodriguez is going to be very surprised when he makes his next move." Jessica overheard this conversation and pulled me aside. "Mom, you never told me you knew FBI agents." "There are many things I haven't told you, sweetheart. I spent 38 years being helpful and discreet for a lot of people. Some of those people went on to successful careers in law enforcement." She shook her head in amazement. "Who else do you know that I don't know about?" "Let's just say that Marcus picked the wrong family to mess with." At exactly 9 o'clock, the next morning, Marcus called. The FBI was ready. "Eleanor, I trust you've had time to consider my offer." "I've had time to consider many things, Marcus." Agent Sterling gave me a thumbs up, indicating they were successfully tracing the call. "Good. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer $5 million to an account I'll specify. You're going to sign custody of the children over to me. And you're going to publicly apologize for manipulating Jessica against me." Huh, that's quite a list of demands. "It's a small price to pay to keep your financial secrets from becoming headline news." "Marcus, I have a counteroffer for you." There was silence on the other end. "You have no position to negotiate from, Eleanor." "I disagree. Here's my counteroffer. You turn yourself in to the FBI immediately, return all stolen documents, and agree to never contact any member of my family again. In return, I won't press charges for breaking and entering." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "Eleanor, you're not understanding the situation. I have documents that could destroy you." "Actually, Marcus, I think you're the one who doesn't understand the situation." Agent Sterling nodded to me. It was time. "Marcus, I want you to listen very carefully. While you've been planning your little extortion scheme, the FBI has been building a case against you for wire fraud, investment fraud, and interstate financial crimes. They're very good at their job. You're bluffing. Look out your window." There was a crash from Marcus's end of the line, followed by shouting. The FBI had breached his temporary apartment. "Marcus Rodriguez, this is the FBI. You are under arrest." The line went dead. Agent Sterling turned to me with a broad smile. "Mrs. Walsh, it's been a pleasure working with you. Mr. Rodriguez will be facing federal charges that should keep him away from your family for many years." "What about the documents he stole?" "We recovered them from his apartment. They're being returned to you." Over the next few hours, the full scope of the FBI operation became clear. Marcus had been under investigation for months. His investment fraud scheme had affected dozens of victims across multiple states. My situation had simply been the final piece of evidence they needed. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Rebecca Chen, no relation to Margaret, briefed us on Marcus's background. "Mrs. Walsh, I think you should know that Marcus Rodriguez isn't who he claimed to be." "What do you mean?" "His real name is Martin Russo. He's a career con artist with a history of targeting women from wealthy families. Your daughter wasn't his first victim." She showed us photographs and documentation of at least 6 other women Marcus had manipulated and bilked for money over the past decade. Each followed the same pattern: charm offensive, quick marriage proposal, gradual isolation from family, and eventual financial exploitation. Jessica went white. "He's done this before. Multiple times. You were actually one of his more successful marks because he managed to maintain the relationship for several years." "But what about his real estate business?" "It's been a front from the beginning. He'd get just enough legitimate sales to maintain the appearance of success, while using the business to launder money from his various fraud schemes." I felt sick. This man had been in my daughter's life, around my grandchildren, for 5 years. "There's something else," Agent Chen continued. "We found evidence that he had been planning this endgame for over a year. He knew exactly when you'd inherited the Pemberton fortune." "How could he know that?" "He had someone inside the county clerk's office feeding him information about property transfers and estate filings. That person has also been arrested." The scope of Marcus's deception was staggering. Every aspect of his relationship with Jessica had been calculated and manipulated. That evening, after the FBI had finished their work and departed, I sat with Jessica and the children. Tommy and Sarah had been told that their father had to go away for a while because he'd broken some rules. They seemed to accept this explanation with the resilience children possess. "Mom," Jessica said quietly, "I feel so stupid." "Don't. Con artists are professionals at manipulation. That's why they're successful." "But I should have seen the signs." "Maybe, but you saw what he wanted you to see. That's how these people work." She was quiet for a long moment. "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild. We create new traditions, make new memories, and move forward. But the children will need to know about their father eventually. When they're old enough to understand, we'll tell them the truth. That sometimes people we love make very bad choices, and those choices have consequences." Over the following weeks, the story unfolded. In the media, the local newspapers picked up the story of the wealthy widow who'd outsmarted a con artist, but they got most of the details wrong. They portrayed it as a simple case of an ungrateful son-in-law trying to steal from his mother-in-law. They missed the larger picture entirely. What they didn't report was how Marcus's arrest led to the discovery of a sophisticated fraud network operating across 5 states. They didn't mention that dozens of families found closure after years of wondering what had happened to their life savings. They certainly didn't report on the young FBI agent from 15 years ago, whose daughter was still alive today, because a secretary had quietly helped him through his darkest hour. Margaret and I spent considerable time dealing with the legal aftermath. Marcus faced multiple federal charges with a probable sentence of 25 to 30 years. There would be civil lawsuits to recover money for his victims. Jessica would need to navigate the divorce proceedings. But perhaps the most unexpected development came 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest. I was having coffee with Margaret when her phone rang. She answered, then handed it to me with a confused expression. "It's for you. Someone named Victoria Pemberton." I nearly dropped the phone. "Victoria?" "Hello, Eleanor. I'm Harold's great-niece. I believe you knew my great-uncle quite well." "I did. I'm sorry, but Harold never mentioned family members. That's because most of his family treated him poorly when he was alive. I'm calling because I recently inherited some of his personal papers, and I found something that belongs to you." We arranged to meet the next day. Victoria Pemberton was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and her great-uncle's gentle demeanor. "Uncle Harold kept detailed journals," she explained, handing me a leather-bound book. "This one is entirely about you." With trembling hands, I opened the journal. Harold's familiar handwriting filled the pages, documenting our years of working together. But these weren't business notes. These were personal observations about my character, my dedication, to my children, my quiet strength. One entry, dated just 3 months before his death, made me cry. "Eleanor doesn't know it yet, but she saved my life in ways that go far beyond our business relationship. She gave me purpose when I had none, showed me that family isn't always blood. The fortune I'm leaving her is nothing compared to what she's given me. I only hope she understands someday that she earned every penny not through work alone, but through the rare gift of genuine kindness in a world that has precious little of it." Victoria smiled as she watched me read. "He wrote about you constantly. You were like a daughter to him. I never knew. He wanted you to know how much you meant to him, but he was afraid it would change your relationship. He treasured your authenticity." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "He asked me to give this to you if anything ever happened to him. It was supposed to be given to you immediately, but there were complications with his will, and I only found the instructions recently." Inside the box was a simple gold locket. When I opened it, I found 2 photos, one of Harold and myself, at a company Christmas party years ago, and one of my 3 children as young adults. On the back of Harold's photo, in his handwriting, were the words, "To the daughter of my heart." Victoria stayed for dinner that night. She met Jessica and the children, and I learned that she was a social worker who specialized in helping families recover from financial abuse. "Aunt Eleanor," she said, using a title that felt immediately natural, "I'd like to propose something. Uncle Harold left several other properties and assets that I've inherited. I'm interested in establishing a foundation to help families like Jessica's, people who've been victimized by financial predators." The idea sparked something in me. "What did you have in mind?" "A combination of financial support, legal aid, and therapy services. We could help people rebuild their lives after financial abuse." Jessica's eyes lit up. "I could help with that. I understand what it's like." Over the following months, the Pemberton Foundation became reality. We purchased a building in downtown, hired social workers and attorneys, and began offering services to families affected by financial crimes. Jessica threw herself into the work with remarkable passion. She completed training programs in financial counseling and victim advocacy. Watching her transform from a victim into someone who helped other victims heal was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Tommy and Sarah adapted to their new reality with surprising ease. They made friends in the neighborhood, joined Little League and dance classes, and seemed happier than they'd been in years. The absence of constant tension in the house had freed them to be children again. David and Linda become more involved in all our lives. Without Marcus driving wedges between us, we rediscovered the closeness we'd shared before his manipulation. 6 months after Marcus's arrest, I received an unexpected visitor. Detective Mills came to my house with news. "Mrs. Walsh, I thought you should know that Mr. Rodriguez attempted to send messages from prison to several people, including you and your daughter." "What kind of messages?" "Threats, mostly. Claims that he'll get revenge when he's released. The prison has revoked his communication privileges, but I wanted you to be aware." I thanked the detective for the warning, but I wasn't particularly worried. Marcus would be an old man by the time he was eligible for parole. By then, the children would be adults, Jessica would have rebuilt her life, and I would probably be gone. That evening, as I sat in my garden watching Tommy chase fireflies while Jessica and Sarah picked vegetables for dinner, Linda asked me a question that made me think. "Mom, do you ever regret keeping the money secret for so long?" I considered this. No. If I'd revealed it earlier, it would have changed how everyone related to me. You would have seen me as your potential inheritance rather than your mother. But might have made Marcus show his true colors sooner. Perhaps. But then Jessica might not have learned the strength she needed to leave him. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. David joined us on the porch. "Mom, Jessica told me you're thinking about writing a book about this experience." Victoria suggested it. She thinks other families could benefit from reading about how financial abuse works and how to recognize the warning signs. "Would you really want to relive all of that?" I looked at my family, healthy and whole, and finally free of Marcus's influence. If it helps even one family avoid what we went through, it would be worth it. That night, I began writing. The first sentence came easily. "Some people spend their whole lives accumulating wealth, but I discovered that the greatest fortune I possessed wasn't my bank balance or my property holdings. It was the strength to recognize when I was being manipulated and the courage to fight back." The story poured out of me over the following weeks. Not just the events with Marcus, but the earlier story of Harold Pemberton's kindness, of building a life as a single mother, of the quiet moments that had shaped my character. When I finished, I gave the manuscript to Jessica to read first. She returned it with tears in her eyes. "Mom, you didn't just save us from Marcus. You taught us what real strength looks like." The book was published 8 months later. The publisher suggested I use a pen name, but I insisted on using my real name. Eleanor Walsh had nothing to hide. The book became a moderate success, not because people were interested in my story specifically, but because financial abuse was more common than anyone realized. Readers wrote to tell me their own stories of manipulation and recovery. Most importantly, the book brought more people to the Pemberton Foundation. We expanded our services to include educational workshops on recognizing financial manipulation, support groups for survivors, and legal clinics for people trying to escape abuse. Marcus was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 32 years in federal prison. He exhausted his appeals within 2 years. During the trial, we learned that our family hadn't been his only targets during the time he was married to Jessica. He'd been running parallel cons on at least 3 other families. The judge noted during sentencing that Marcus had shown no remorse and had even attempted to threaten witnesses from jail. "Mr. Rodriguez," the judge said, "you have demonstrated a pattern of exploitation that suggests you are simply incapable of living honestly in society. This sentence reflects the need to protect the public from your predatory behavior." Jessica finalized her divorce 6 months after his conviction. She kept our last name for herself and the children, saying she wanted to distance them as much as possible from their father's crimes. 2 years after Marcus's arrest, Jessica remarried. Her new husband, Daniel Thompson, was a teacher at Sarah's school who had been quietly supportive during our family's crisis. He was nothing like Marcus, gentle where Marcus had been aggressive, encouraging where Marcus had been controlling, humble where Marcus had been arrogant. When Jessica told me she was thinking of marrying Daniel, I had only one question. Are you marrying him because you love him, or because he's safe? She thought for a long moment. Both. I'm old enough to know that love without safety isn't really love. The wedding was small and beautiful, held in my garden with only family and close friends. Watching Jessica's face during the ceremony, seeing genuine joy there instead of the anxious performance I'd witnessed at her first wedding, I felt a peace I hadn't known I was missing. Daniel adopted Tommy and Sarah a year later. Marcus had signed away his parental rights from prison, apparently as part of some attempt to reduce his sentence. It didn't work, but it freed my grandchildren from any legal connection to him. On the 3rd anniversary of Marcus's arrest, I received a visitor who surprised me. Patricia Wong, our private investigator, came to my house with a bottle of champagne and a smile. Mrs. Walsh, I wanted to let you know that the Rodriguez case has been closed permanently. The last of his appeals was denied yesterday. Thank you for everything you did for us, Patricia. Actually, I wanted to thank you. Working on your case led to several other major investigations. We've been able to help dozens of families recover from financial abuse. Your case was the key that unlocked everything. She paused, looking thoughtful. There's something else. We've been monitoring communications from prison. Rodriguez has been trying to recruit other inmates for some kind of revenge plan against your family. I felt a chill. What kind of plan? Nothing specific that we can prosecute. Just vague threats and attempts to gather information about your current life. The prison has isolated him, but I thought you should know. That evening, I called Agent Sterling. Eleanor, we're aware of the situation. Rodriguez has been placed in solitary confinement for the foreseeable future. He won't be communicating with anyone. How long is the foreseeable future? In his case, probably the rest of his sentence. His behavior has been extremely problematic. He's attacked several inmates and guards, always claiming they're working for you. He thinks I have that much influence? Sterling laughed. He's constructed an elaborate fantasy where you have connections to everyone from prison wardens to the federal judge who sentenced him. His prison psychiatrist says it's a classic narcissistic response to powerlessness. So he's gone completely delusional? Let's just say that Marcus Rodriguez is no longer operating in the same reality as the rest of us. This should have been comforting, but something about it worried me. Desperate people were unpredictable, and desperate people with delusions could be dangerous even from prison. I increased security at the house and made sure Jessica and the children were always accompanied when out in public. It felt like an overreaction, but after everything we'd been through, I wasn't taking any chances. The years passed peacefully. Tommy and Sarah grew into confident teenagers with no memory of their biological father's crimes. Jessica's marriage thrived. The foundation expanded to 5 locations and helped hundreds of families. I turned 75 in 2028, surrounded by my children, grandchildren, and the extended family we'd built through the foundation. Victoria Pemberton had become like a niece to me, her own children calling me Aunt Eleanor. During the birthday celebration, David raised a toast. To Mom, who taught us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait for the right moment to act. That night, as I was cleaning up from the party, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. There was no postmark, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in familiar handwriting. Happy birthday, Eleanor. The account isn't settled yet. M. My hand shook as I read the note. Marcus was supposed to be in solitary confinement. How could he have sent this? I called Agent Sterling immediately, even though it was late. Eleanor, I'll have agents at your house within an hour. Don't touch the note anymore. We'll dust it for fingerprints. Harry, how is this possible? You said he was isolated. I don't know yet, but we'll find out. The investigation revealed that someone had been paid to deliver the note to my house. Security cameras caught a figure in dark clothing leaving it at my door at 3 a.m. The person's face was never visible. More troubling, a guard at Marcus's prison had been found with $10,000 in cash hidden in his car. Under interrogation, he admitted that Marcus had been paying him to deliver messages to accomplices on the outside. Mrs. Walsh, agent. Sterling said grimly, "We believe Rodriguez has been planning something for years. The guard said he'd been passing messages for over 2 years. What kind of messages? Instructions for surveillance on your family. Payment for gathering information about your routines, your security measures, the Foundation's activities." I felt cold. Are we safe? We're implementing 24-hour protection for your entire family, and we're transferring Rodriguez to a maximum security facility with no communication privileges whatsoever. But even as he said it, I knew that Marcus would find a way to send one more message. He was obsessed, and obsessed people don't give up easily. The message came 1 week later, not to me, but to Jessica. She found it slipped under her car windshield after leaving the Foundation office late one evening. You think you won, but this story isn't over. Eleanor stole my life, and I'm going to take everything from her, starting with what she loves most. This time, the note included photographs. Pictures of Tommy and Sarah walking to school, of Jessica entering the Foundation building, of Daniel at his classroom. Someone had been watching us for weeks or months. The FBI response was swift and comprehensive. They traced the payments to a network of people Marcus had somehow recruited despite his isolation. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been using a complex system of intermediaries to coordinate surveillance and had been planning something for years. What terrified me most was the realization that Marcus hadn't been trying to escape or get his sentence reduced. He'd been content to stay in prison as long as he could orchestrate revenge from inside. The FBI arrested 6 people connected to Marcus's prison network. Under questioning, they revealed that Marcus had promised them substantial payments from money he claimed I'd stolen from him. He'd convinced them that once they'd dealt with my family, they'd be able to claim millions of dollars in, rightfully, his assets. Mrs. Walsh, Agent Sterling said during our final briefing, I want you to know that we've neutralized the entire network. Rodriguez will be transferred to ADX Florence, the Supermax facility in Colorado. He will have no contact with the outside world for the remainder of his sentence. What about the people who were watching us? They're all in custody. Most of them thought they were just gathering information for a civil lawsuit. They didn't realize they were part of a stalking and harassment campaign. And Marcus? What's his psychological state? Agent Sterling hesitated. According to the prison psychiatrist, he spends most of his time writing detailed plans for what he'll do when he gets out. These plans include not just revenge against your family, but elaborate schemes for reclaiming what he sees as his rightful property. He still thinks he's entitled to my estate? He's constructed a complete alternate reality where you conspired to steal money that belonged to him. In his mind, everything that happened was part of an elaborate frame-up. I shook my head. Will he ever be released? Not if I have anything to say about it. His behavior in prison has been so problematic that he'll likely face additional charges that could extend his sentence significantly. That should have been the end of it, but I knew better. Men like Marcus don't simply disappear. Even locked away in the most secure prison in the country, he would find ways to make his influence felt. I was right to be concerned, but the final confrontation would come from a direction none of us anticipated. 5 years had passed since Marcus's transfer to ADX Florence. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm that I'd almost forgotten was possible. The Foundation was thriving, with offices in 3 states and a waiting list of families seeking our services. Jessica had built a new life with Daniel, and they'd just announced they were expecting their first child together. Tommy and Sarah, now 22 and 25, had graduated college and were building their own careers. I was 79 years old, and finally allowing myself to believe that the nightmare with Marcus was truly over. That belief shattered on a Tuesday morning in October when Agent Sterling called with news that made my blood run cold. "Eleanor, Marcus Rodriguez died in prison yesterday." I sat down heavily. "How?" "Heart attack, according to the medical examiner." "But Eleanor, there's something you need to know. Before he died, he made a phone call. I thought he had no contact with the outside world. He didn't. This call was made during a medical emergency when he was being transferred to the prison hospital. Somehow he managed to activate a hidden cell phone during the transfer. My hands began to shake. Who did he call? "We're still investigating, but Eleanor, we need you to implement maximum security protocols immediately. All of you." "What aren't you telling me, Harry?" There was a long pause. "Before his death, Rodriguez sent a package to someone. We intercepted it this morning. It contained detailed plans, maps of your property, information about your family's routines, and instructions for what he called the final settlement." "Instructions for whom?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. Eleanor, I need to see you immediately." An hour later, Agent Sterling sat in my living room with FBI technicians installing new security equipment throughout my house. The package Marcus had sent revealed the depth of his obsession. He'd spent 5 years in solitary confinement creating detailed plans for revenge that spanned dozens of pages. "Most disturbing," Sterling explained, "is that these plans include information that's relatively current. Someone's been feeding him updates about your family's activities. But you arrested everyone in his network." "We thought we did, but there's someone we missed, someone who's been very careful to stay hidden." The package had been addressed to M. Santos at a post office box in Denver. FBI agents were already watching the box, but no one had come to claim the package yet. "Eleanor, we have reason to believe that this person might be someone close to your family, someone with regular access to information about your lives." I felt sick. The idea that Marcus still had a spy among us was terrifying. Jessica arrived with Daniel and the children, all of them looking concerned. Agent Sterling explained the situation, while technicians continued installing panic buttons and cameras. "I don't understand," Jessica said. "Who could it be? Everyone in our lives knows what Marcus did to us." "That's what we need to figure out," Sterling replied. "I need all of you to think carefully. Is there anyone who's asked unusual questions about your routines? Anyone who's shown excessive interest in your security measures or the Foundation's work?" We spent hours going through everyone we knew. Friends, employees of the Foundation, neighbors, service providers. No one stood out as suspicious. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house, checking and rechecking the new locks. And alarms. The feeling of being watched had returned. That familiar paranoia I'd hoped never to experience again. At 3 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Agent Sterling. "Eleanor, someone tried to claim the package an hour ago." "Who?" "A young woman, early 20s, brown hair. She ran when our agents approached. We're reviewing security footage now." The description meant nothing to me, but something nagged at my memory. The next day brought another shock. Linda called me, sobbing. "Mom, they took Amy." Amy was Linda's daughter, my granddaughter who was away at college in Denver. She'd been missing for 12 hours, and the police had found signs of a struggle. In her dorm room. Agent Sterling arrived at my house within an hour. "Eleanor, we believe Amy's disappearance is connected to the package. The timing is too coincidental." "What do we do?" "We wait. Whoever took her will contact you soon with demands." The call came that evening. A distorted voice that could have been male or female spoke words that chilled me to the bone. Eleanor. Walsh. You destroyed the man I loved. Now you'll know what loss feels like. Where's Amy? Is she hurt? She's alive. For now. You have 48 hours to transfer $10 million to an account I'll specify. If you involve the police, she dies. I want proof she's alive. Check your email. The line went dead. The email contained a video of Amy, clearly terrified but unharmed, holding a newspaper with today's date. Agent Sterling, who had been monitoring the call, immediately activated a full task force. Eleanor, we're not going to wait for a ransom demand. We're finding her. Who is this person? Who could love Marcus enough to do this? We're investigating everyone who ever visited him in prison, everyone who wrote to him, anyone who might have had contact with him. The investigation moved quickly. FBI agents descended on ADX Florence, interviewing guards and administrators. They discovered that one guard, a man named Robert Chen, had been fired 6 months earlier for suspected rules violations. More importantly, they learned that Chen had a daughter named Maria who had been visiting the prison regularly. She wasn't visiting Chen, Sterling explained. She was visiting Rodriguez. She'd been pretending to be a paralegal working on appeals cases. The pieces began falling into place. Maria Chen had started visiting Marcus 3 years ago, initially, as part of a law clinic program. But she'd continued visiting even after the program ended, apparently developing a romantic obsession with him. She's 23 years old, Sterling continued. Psychology major, no criminal history. But in her dorm room, we found shrine to Rodriguez. Photos, letters, detailed plans that match what he sent in that package. How did she get information? About our family? She'd been following all of you on social media, attending foundation events, even volunteering at the foundation office under a false name. I felt sick. This young woman had been among us, listening to our conversations, observing our lives, all while planning revenge for a man who had never deserved her devotion. The FBI traced the ransom call to a cabin in the Rocky Mountains. Within hours, a tactical team had surrounded the building. The standoff lasted 3 tense hours, with Maria alternating between threats to kill Amy and desperate pleas for someone to understand her love for Marcus. During the negotiation, I learned details about Maria's obsession that defied comprehension. She believed Marcus had been framed, that he was a brilliant man destroyed by a vindictive family. She'd spent 3 years writing to him, visiting him, and planning his eventual release and revenge. Mr. Rodriguez understood me, she told the negotiator. He saw my potential when no one else did. He promised that once Eleanor paid for what she did, we'd be together. Maria, the negotiator replied gently. Mr. Rodriguez died in prison. He can't be with anyone. Lies, she screamed. She killed him. She arranged his death. She'll pay for everything. The delusion was complete. In Maria's mind, I hadn't just sent Marcus to prison, I'd orchestrated his death. The standoff ended when Maria collapsed from exhaustion. The tactical team moved in and found Amy bound but unharmed in a back room. The reunion with Linda was emotional beyond words. Maria Chen was charged with kidnapping, extortion, and several other federal crimes. During her trial, details emerged about the extent of her obsession. She'd spent her parents' life savings on private investigators to gather information about our family. She'd changed her major to psychology specifically to understand how Eleanor manipulated everyone. Most chilling were the journals found in her possession. Page after page of fantasies about reuniting with Marcus, detailed plans for torturing me and my family, and alternate scenarios for Marcus's inevitable return. The judge sentenced Maria to 25 years in federal prison. During the sentencing, she maintained her delusion, screaming that justice would eventually be served. Mr. Rodriguez's spirit will not rest until Eleanor Walsh faces the consequences of her evil, she declared. This isn't over. But it was over. With Maria's arrest, the last thread connecting us to Marcus's revenge had been severed. The FBI conducted a thorough investigation and confirmed that no other accomplices existed. Agent Sterling visited me a week after the trial concluded. Eleanor, we've completed our investigation. Rodriguez's network has been completely dismantled. You and your family are finally safe. How can you be sure? Because Marcus Rodriguez was a narcissist who trusted no one completely, except for Maria Chen. She was his only true believer, and now she's locked away. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There's something else you should know. During the investigation, we discovered that Rodriguez actually died of an overdose, not a heart attack. He'd been saving medication for months, planning his own death. Suicide? His final act of manipulation. He knew Maria would blame you for his death. He planned his suicide specifically to drive her to revenge. The enormity of Marcus's evil was still revealing itself, even after his death. He'd manipulated a young woman into destroying her life for revenge he wouldn't live to see. Life slowly returned to normal. Amy recovered from her ordeal with the help of therapy and family support. Jessica gave birth to a healthy baby girl, naming her Hope. The foundation continued its work, helping families recover from financial abuse. On my 80th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family, I looked around the room and marveled at how far we'd all come. Jessica was thriving in her marriage, her children were happy and healthy, and the nightmare of Marcus Rodriguez was finally, truly over. David raised a toast during the celebration. To Mom, who taught us that sometimes evil plans its own destruction. That night, as I was cleaning up from the party, I found a letter that had been placed on my nightstand. For a moment, panic flashed through me. Then I recognized the handwriting. It was from Harold Pemberton's journal, but one I'd never seen before. Victoria had found it among some papers and saved it for this birthday. The entry was dated just days before Harold's death. Eleanor doesn't know that I've set up one final surprise for her. After everything she's been through, after all the kindness she's shown in a world that often shows none in return, she deserves to know that her story inspired others. I've created a scholarship fund to be revealed on her 80th birthday. Young women who've overcome financial hardship and family manipulation will receive full college funding, along with mentorship through the Pemberton Foundation. I've called it the Eleanor Walsh Scholarship for Survivors, because Eleanor is exactly that, a survivor who turned her pain into purpose, her trauma into triumph. She saved me from loneliness in my final years. Perhaps this scholarship will save others from the kind of predators who nearly destroyed her family. The fund starts with $10 million. I suspect Eleanor will find a way to grow it far beyond that. I sat on my bed, tears streaming down my face, holding Harold's final gift. Even in death, he was still looking out for me, still finding ways to honor our friendship. The next morning, I called Victoria and Margaret to discuss implementing Harold's final wish. The Eleanor Walsh Scholarship for Survivors was announced a month later, providing full college funding for young women who'd experienced financial or domestic abuse. Jessica became the first recipient counselor for the scholarship program, using her experience to mentor other survivors. Amy, fully recovered from her ordeal, changed her major to law with the goal of helping other families navigate financial crimes. Maria Chen remained in prison, and prison records indicated she'd been placed in psychiatric care after several incidents involving delusions about Marcus's imminent return. The doctors reported that she'd created an elaborate fantasy where Marcus had faked his death and was planning to rescue her. Agent Sterling visited occasionally, keeping me updated on the various criminals who'd been caught as a result of investigating Marcus's network. The ripple effects of that investigation had helped dozens of families recover stolen money and see justice done. On the 5th anniversary of Marcus's death, Jessica and I visited the foundation's main office together. The wall displayed photos of all the families we'd helped, hundreds of people who'd rebuilt their lives after financial abuse. "Mom," Jessica said, studying the photos, "do you think Marcus ever imagined that destroying our family would lead to all this good?" I considered her question. Marcus never thought beyond his own immediate gratification. He certainly never imagined that his victims would turn their trauma into something that helped others. Sometimes I wonder if we should feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for the child he once was, who was shaped into someone capable of such cruelty, but I feel no sympathy for the man who chose to hurt innocent people. That evening, the family gathered for our traditional dinner. 3 generations around the table, sharing stories and laughter. Tommy had just gotten engaged to a wonderful young woman named Susan. Sarah was starting medical school. The new baby, Hope, slept peacefully in Daniel's arms. As I looked around the table, I realized that Marcus had failed in the most fundamental way possible. He'd tried to destroy our family, but we'd emerged stronger than ever. He'd attempted to isolate us from each other, but we'd grown closer. He'd sought to leave us traumatized and defeated, but we'd transformed our experience into purpose. The phone rang during dessert. It was Agent Sterling. "Eleanor, I have some news. Maria. Chen died in prison today. Apparently, she stopped eating 3 weeks ago, claiming she needed to join Marcus." The prison medical staff tried to intervene, but she was persistent. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the last connection to Marcus was finally severed. Sadness for a young woman who'd wasted her life on an obsession that was never real. "How do you feel about it?" Jessica asked after I'd shared the news with the family. "Sad," I answered truthfully. She was someone's daughter, someone's child who went wrong. "Like how Marcus was probably someone's child once," Sarah observed. "Yes, evil people aren't born evil. Something shapes them into what they become. But that doesn't excuse the harm they cause." Later that night, I found myself in my garden, looking up at the stars. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, but it felt clean and fresh rather than threatening. For the first time in over a decade, I felt truly at peace. Not just because Marcus was gone, or because Maria could no longer hurt us. I felt at peace because I'd learned something valuable through all the trauma. We can't control what people do to us, but we can control what we do with what's been done to us. Marcus had tried to destroy us, but we'd used his attacks as motivation to build something beautiful. The foundation, the scholarship program, the strength our family had found, none of it would have existed without first going through hell. I didn't say a prayer of gratitude for the trauma, but I was grateful that we'd been strong enough to survive it and wise enough to transform it. A month later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a book, a memoir written by one of the women we'd helped through the foundation. She'd been bilked out of her life savings by a financial predator, lost her house, nearly lost her children to the foster system. The inscription read, "To Eleanor Walsh, who taught me that surviving isn't enough. You have to thrive. Thank you for showing me how." I turned to the dedication page and found another surprise. This book is dedicated to all the women who refuse to let their worst days define them, and especially to Eleanor Walsh, who proved that sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived. That phrase stayed with me. The best revenge is a life well lived. Marcus had spent the last years of his life plotting revenge, consumed by hatred, destroying everyone who came near him. He'd died miserable and alone, his only legacy a trail of victims and a young woman whose life he'd ruined with his manipulation. Meanwhile, we had built something beautiful. Our family was closer than ever. We'd helped hundreds of people. We'd created institutions that would outlast all of us. We'd turned our pain into purpose. As I sit here now, writing the final words of this story, I'm 83 years old. Jessica's daughter, Hope, is 3 years old and calls me Gigi. Tommy and Sarah have children of their own. The foundation has helped over 2,000 families. The scholarship program has funded the education of 500 young women. Marcus Rodriguez is dust in a prison cemetery, his name remembered only as a cautionary tale. Maria Chen is buried beside her dreams of a man who never deserved her devotion. But we're still here, still building, still helping, still living lives, full of love and purpose. Sometimes people ask me if I regret adopting Marcus all those years ago. I never do. Without Marcus, I wouldn't have understood the signs of financial abuse that I now teach others to recognize. Without his manipulations, the foundation might never have been created. He intended to destroy us. Instead, he gave us the knowledge and motivation to protect countless others from predators like himself. If that's not justice, I don't know what is. The story ends where it began, with family. But now it's a family that's been tested by fire and emerged stronger. A family that knows the value of love precisely because we've experienced its absence. A family that fights for each other because we've learned what happens when someone tries to tear us apart. Marcus Rodriguez wanted to write the final chapter of our story. Instead, we wrote our own. And unlike his tale of bitterness and revenge, ours has a happy ending. As I put down my pen, the phone rings. It's Jessica, calling to say that Hope just spoke her first sentence. I love you, Gigi. Some endings aren't really endings at all. They're just new beginnings in disguise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.